Let's go. So this afternoon's interview, brilliant one. I'm really looking forward to this again. So this is a really exciting one with Chris Peil from the Move Well project. So some of you may be familiar, some not. So I've been following Chris's career for the last few years since we met, actually when he was doing his sports medicine master's degree at UCLan. And, you know, I have to be honest, I've been an avid follower of his philosophies, his methodologies and stuff that he's been doing with some pretty strong people. Is that, you know, fair to say? You know, you only have to look at his social media to profile it. He's worked with some of the world's strongest athletes. So, you know, it's going to be a really interesting chat. And I'm sure many of you that like strength training or if you're a CrossFit athlete or you are doing some strongman stuff, then, you know, this will be some good little nuggets in here. So I'll hand over to Chris to kind of give himself a little bit more of an overview of what he does and who he is.
Well, thank you for having me. You've done quite a good job, actually. So now I'm a bit stumped. Yeah, I'm actually from a personal training background, so I'm basically an overqualified personal trainer. That's who I am. But I think that gives you a different perspective in the therapy side of things and the rehab side of things, because you view things from a performance perspective, and the process you follow is actually conveniently for me, and obviously this is nice. What's kind of coming out in a lot of the academic research for rehab, physio and everything else, that maybe more people should be operating this way, which is very much kind of like a personal trainer, where you're trying to get people more active, you're trying to work towards their actual goal in the context of their lifestyle, as opposed to simply being focused on like a pathology, which might be the traditional sort of outlook. You have this broken, I must fix it with my magic fingers. Pretty much everything I do is proactive rehab, and pretty much everything I do is in the context of somebody wanting to achieve something, not just be sort of injury free. So what I can't do is I can't say to people, well, just rest that, because they're almost always coming to me to say, right, I have this issue and I have it whilst I'm trying to achieve something else. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I have a slightly different background, but I'm now very much rehab focused, and that's probably the vast majority of my business, and a lot of them strength athletes, as you say.
And I think that what's quite nice about that is, and I think what most therapists don't do well, and something we pride ourselves at Summit of doing, and I know that's why we get on quite well, is the fact that, you know, you're very outcome focused, aren't you? You know, one of the big goals around you is that, you know, if from what I follow anyway, and the conversations that we've had, is that, you know, you're very, very personable and very looking at what the athlete, if that's, it might not always be a strength athlete, it might be somebody that's come back from an operation or something, but you're very goal focused and helping them achieve that, aren't you?
I think even if you're working with, and obviously we all do a fair bit of work with sort of Gen Pop, even if you're working with, and this does happen to be a fair bit, somebody who comes in who's an athlete or a recreational athlete, and then when they get a good result, they bring them on. And I've had that a few times, and it's probably like the best compliment you can get, because if you trust somebody with your old dear, then you really do trust them. And, you know, it might be, and, you know, I've had this as an exact situation, that their old dear works as a post lady. I don't know what the correct term for post woman is now, but as a post lady. And the process is no different, is it? You're looking and going, okay, well, if you're an athlete, what do you need to have the physical capacity to do when you're competing? And it's okay, well, that client needs the physical capacity to do their job and their lifestyle. So the outcome, it remains very much outcome focused, but that's it. It's getting them back to doing what they need to be able to do, as opposed to what I see far too often of, well, I went in, they said this was what was wrong, and they tried to treat this in isolation. You think, well, it doesn't really make any sense to me, and it never has. And it, like I say, it's just refreshing that then you look into some of the research, the more recent research, saying, yeah, actually, we get better outcomes if we are more interested in the patient, if we spend more time with them, if we know more about them, if the advice we give them takes into consideration more directly what they do. And as you say, I think that's something we've got in common in terms of it's clearly what you guys do. as well. And it's the way the whole industry should be moving. And as we kind of had a chat about before we started recording, actually it means that in the current situation where you can't do hands-on therapy, it doesn't really affect us that much, because we're still doing an awful lot in terms of adding value for people, in terms of if something they were doing with their training was causing them a problem and that was going to have to be modified, that's part of the overall approach. It's not, I do a treatment separate to you going off and continuing to do what caused you the problem in the first place, because that doesn't make any sense.
No, I totally agree. And, you know, one of the things you mentioned there, and I think it was quite nice, kind of, but the research into strength training and in that rehabilitation process. And one of the, you know, the myths that I hope we try and clear up with in this is actually the importance of the use of strength training. Now, I understand there's a difference between strength training, and I think let's talk about this for your post lady and some of your strongman athletes. But generally, what would, you know, there seems to be a common, you know, we'll go on to what strength training injuries and what people can do to prevent injuries during strength training. But there seems to be there's a lot of fear around strength training in general, because of, you know, especially people don't want to get injured, or if they've been injured, they don't want to add strength into the program because of fear of re-injury. So how would you address that? Because that's very much part of what you do.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I mentioned to you or not, I've started doing a doctorate, so not a PhD, a professional doctorate in elite performance. And my area of interest on this is there isn't actually that much research on the strength side of things, because of course there's no money involved. So if you look at research, injury prevention research for football, you know, there's libraries full of it, because there's a lot of money to be made and potentially sort of saved in terms of protecting the athletes. There isn't any money in, you know, powerlifting, strongman, Olympic lifting in that way, so there isn't any research. But weirdly, the movements, particularly the sort of powerlifting based and Olympic lifting based movements, are the ones used in S&C for all major sports. So it's odd that there isn't really much research suggesting what risk there might be intrinsically in that, because of course you're doing it to try and improve performance and reduce injury risk.
Yeah,
and it brings us very much onto what you're saying about the strength training will be different if you're using it for a rehab purpose or you're using it for an outcome in itself. And it's one of the biggest problems we've got with the crossover with the strength and conditioning coaches and personal trainers and just people in general with a massive bias towards or against strength training. The guys who like it for its own outcome, you're talking like, so powerlifting, obviously people who only have a passing interest, 3 lifts for a 1 rep max, squat, bench, deadlift, and you get 3 goes each in a powerlifting meet. So it's incredibly sort of one-dimensional. They're all bilateral static lifts for maximum one rep effort. So it's intrinsically a massively imbalanced thing to be doing. And what you're trying to do is get the maximum amount of load on the bar through a nominal range of movement. And that's judged by the judges. Well, that makes those movements sport specific in themselves. So if you can do something that reduces the range of movement of the actual load, but still gets you through the rules, you know, the list still passes, that sport specifically is beneficial. It's got no benefit to sport strength and conditioning training or rehab, has it? Because you're basically cheating the system. You're doing something that only benefits the outcome for that sport. It is a sport specific thing in itself, which is where I get into the issue with people going, well, you know, the correct way to do this. It's like, correct doesn't exist. It's you know, the appropriate way for you and your needs. So a lot of the time, the strength training that you're giving, like I say, the post lady who's older, they might not even identify, and I might not even sort of frame as strength training. This is something I use as an exercise, it's a rehab exercise. Actually, intrinsically, rehab exercises have to be strength exercises because they have to, well, I suppose They could be repatterned. It could be a habit-based thing, couldn't it? It could be a motor skill practice thing. But effectively, pretty much all of it has to come down to being strength training, because you need to, for most of it, fulfill enough stress to get an adaptation. If you're not getting enough stress, you're not getting adaptation. You just waste your time, aren't you? You're not doing anything.
I think that's an important thing to note, isn't it? I think that, when we talk about strength training, there's different ends of the spectrum in it. I know we're going to talk about the strength athletes, and that's a whole different ball game. But I think for those, you mentioned the mums and the post lady, and you've still got to put enough load on the body to allow the physiological adaptation to improve or change, haven't you? And I think that's something, that doesn't mean that you're going to be doing the same weight and load as, one of the strongman athletes, but it's load appropriate, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the association people have got when you say strength training, are you going to do this strength exercise? And what you might mean by it, you've got to be a bit careful with it. You've got to be careful with the language you use, because if you say strength training, they're immediately turned off by it. They're not going to do it because their association is poor. And that's a shame, because essentially, I mean, it'd be a mouthful. If you're saying, this is an exercise to get you a tissue adaptation so that you have less, you have more capacity, and therefore you're going to have less pain and less problem, less risk. Oh yeah, I can buy into that. Yeah, okay, that's strength exercise. And that's the issue we've got to overcome. And the strength sports and bodybuilding and the whole gym world has done that to itself, because it's trying to make itself an extreme. And that's the other sort of issue that you get with people trying to promote what they enjoy to be a load of things that it might not. And you'll get people who like powerlifting promoting the 3 power lifts done for maximum weight as the answer to everything, because being stronger makes you more injury resistant. It's like, well, it does if everything else remains the same. It doesn't if by becoming more specialist in those 3 lifts you neglect all other physical attributes. So I recently had this chat with somebody else about, there's a difference between becoming more physically capable and becoming a more specialist. And if you're an athlete, you're needing to become more specialist, at least to a degree. But at some point, you go too far down that road and you can't do other things. You can't be as good an athlete because you injure yourself. And actually, I see an awful lot of that. I come across an awful lot of, they are strength athletes that do want to be a specialist, and the interventions that I give them need to respect that. They can't be something that makes them worse at their chosen activity. Say it is strongman, for example. But if they've gone so far down a route that they're such a specialist, their inability to do day-to-day tasks is actually causing them a problem. They need to spend a fraction of their time doing some of the other stuff. And that is incredibly common. And I see an awful lot of it.
And that's something that I, wanted to kind of touch on, really, because it's like, how do you, like you said, these guys who are specialists, so let's pick the powerlifters like you just described, how do you get it through? Or if guys are powerlifters that are watching this and their training consists of, well, I'm going to deadlift, I'm going to squat, and I'm going to bench press, and that's my training done, and that's all I'm going to do because that's all I need to be specialist at those 3, so why waste my time? What advice could you do to keep them away from the likes of us and getting injured? What would you kind of encourage them to do?
I posted this a couple of days ago, but the old Russian mentality of your specialist performance training sits on the top of the pyramid, and then you've got specialist physical preparation, which is the attributes that underpin that, and then your general physical preparation is your base, which are just the general attributes that underpin being able to move about and just do stuff. And that's the kind of mentality that I think is useful if people can kind of get their heads around that and think, I think of it as a matrix in terms of you've got movement patterns. You need to be able to move your own body weight up and down squatting. You need to be able to pick up external objects hinging. You need to be able to move, climb stairs, walk, run, which are all sort of lunge type patterns. But obviously they exist in all different directions as well. And you need to be able to push and pull stuff with the upper body and rotate and resist rotation. And everyone needs to be able to do all those things to a level. And then you've got velocity, acceleration, deceleration is the other sort of half of that matrix. So you've got all of those movement patterns, and then they exist at different velocities. If you're a powerlifter, you are doing 3 out of arguably sort of 6 patterns. You're doing them in one plane of movement out of 3, and you're doing them at one velocity for one duration. So you're so narrow across the whole spectrum. Yeah. It's not a massive surprise that the world in general breaks you. And that's what I normally find. I normally find that a lot of the time they'll come with issues that aren't directly the 3 list related. I'm getting horrendous back pumps when I try and walk the dog. I've got this niggle, I've got that niggle, and they'll think it might be down to the general training. And actually, it's not so down to general training, it's down to what they're not doing, the training they are not doing. You've got this huge imbalance and this huge deficit of the ability to move off the spot, the ability to stand on one leg, which is kind of important if you want to walk anywhere. We might poke fun, but I've had clients who've got like 300 kilo deadlifts and can't stand on one leg and balance for more than 5 or 6 seconds. And you're like, well, yeah, you've got an issue. Yeah, you've got no lateral stability at all. So this is the crux of your problem. And what you've got to do, in my opinion, is not end up trying to normalize everybody because they're an athlete, they are a specialist. They want that 300 kilo deadlift to be a 400 kilo deadlift, and you need to be part of that process and helping them. You may have to explain to them from an ethical perspective that what they're doing isn't actually healthy. And as long as they understand that, it's not your job, in my opinion, to stand in the way of that. If they're informed and they understand that. But they probably do need to understand that you can do them to do enough stuff that they don't become symptomatic and they can continue down that road. So it might only be 5% of their overall training time. They do a few things in different energy systems, different directions, different durations, different velocities, and become a little bit more balanced. And only a little bit more balanced, enough to allow them to move forward again in the direction they want to go. Because whilst they're hurting, they're not moving forward at all.
Yeah.
So I think that actually crosses over as a concept to a lot of sports that aren't my specialism necessarily, like endurance athletes. Same kind of thing, do they need to spend a fraction of the time doing the bit that they don't like doing, which might be sort of strength and power work, in the same way that I need the strength and power guys to basically move off the spot and be able to move sideways.
I mean, in the series of lectures that we've been doing, interviews we've been doing on this, I think there is that commonality. I think what we're finding an awful lot, especially in endurance running, their specialism, they just want to run. Just let me run. I don't want to do anything else but run. And actually, when you listen to the guys that specialize in running, the first thing they do is, look, we need some variety in your training. You need to actually add stuff in. You can't just be runners and run. And I think that's a very similar concept to what you're saying is.
But matrix-wise, for them, they've got one movement that arguably is like an integration, say 3 patterns, but they're not doing the whole range, and they're not doing it through big range of movement. So that's very limited. Again, one energy system, one velocity. It's just imbalanced, isn't it? And at any point, I think if you become imbalanced enough, it doesn't matter which direction you're imbalanced in, that's going to cause you a problem. And again, they don't want to be a bodybuilder. So if you try and force your bias on them, you're like, no, you don't want to be distance running. You want to be doing some strength work as well. And your strength work for running looks like Ronnie Coleman's program. Yeah, that's not helpful, and it's not. You're imposing your thoughts and your biases on them, and that's. I think the whole reason I got anywhere with any of the strength athletes was because my background and my bias is gym based. So I think of everything from a gym perspective, so I can relate. And I'm not telling them not to do it. I can remember, and this is this be 15, 20 years ago maybe. I tweaked my neck over head pressing, and this is before I was doing any of this. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's sore. And now I know exactly what I'd done, and it really didn't need much interfering with it at all. And I ended up with the chiropractors, and he told me not to lift. And obviously I never went and saw him again, which it turned out to be the right thing anyway, because why would you do that? But that aside, my bias against chiropractic aside, even if I didn't have the issue that I do with chiropractic, I still have an issue with the way you just generally treat the patient, and not saying, okay, well, how can I help you get back to what you want to be doing? Just telling somebody that they don't want to do what they do want to do, I don't get that mentality at all. And because certainly the extreme sort of strength sports and bodybuilding are intrinsically probably not that great for your health, because it's a bell curve, isn't it? Yeah, being strong is good for your health, of course it is. Yeah, being strong helps you more physically capable. But as I said, if you take it to that extreme, that you then foregoing other physical attributes, it starts to become unhealthy. I think a lot of strength athletes are terrified to go and see anyone who they see in any way as a medical professional, because they're going to tell them off.
And I think that's the first thing that we see. If we only see any strength athletes in clinic, or we give advice, then one of the first things that I guess you say to them is, well, look, just to let you know, part of your journey will be about exercising. The first thing they go is, oh, thank goodness for that. I mean, I don't have to stop. No, not at all. And I think, it's like, no, we might have to modify, and we might have to do some load appropriate stuff. And like you've said, we might have to add a bit of variation into your training. But fundamentally, no, I think actually keeping you moving will keep you sane, because
probably the best thing that I took out of doing the masters was I was very much of a sort of biomechanical mindset. And again, people get all out of the pram about that when you're talking about pain. And it's like, okay, well, let's just shelve pain for a second and say if it comes down to actual injuries, biomechanics still massively relevant, and you can't get away from this. But what I wasn't really about, which added a huge amount to my practice, was the overall workload management. So the acute chronic workload concept and all of Gabbett's stuff was massive for me, of going, okay, so actually, yeah, if your biomechanics are as good as they could be for the activities that you're doing, if you still just go at it like a complete dick, you're still going to get a slightly different type of injury. Yeah, that makes sense. This explains loads. But the flip side of that being, if when you've had an acute injury, you stop doing everything and you get massively deconditioned rest of body, what does that mean for your overall rehab process? And exactly what you're just saying, no, we don't need to stop, we need to keep going, because otherwise we're going to start this horrendous domino effect of, we tell you to take 12 weeks off everything whilst you rehab one area, and then how do we get you back from there performance levels you want to be at the pace you're going to be at without breaking something else?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key factors, and what I like about what you do. I don't know what's going off here, but sorry, I think something going off in the middle of this, so I apologise to everyone. It's on zero notifications, so I don't know what's gone on. So I don't know what I've done. I've pressed something and something's gonna stop now anyway. Well, I think one of the things is, I think that, what I like about the work you do, and I think the reason why you are successful, I think you've got to find a practitioner you trust and understands the individual and the sport, don't you? I think that, like you've said, if you take 12 weeks off doing nothing, unconditioned, and then, they're going to be even more gutted when they try and go back. So I think it is.
If you're somebody who's got a 300 kilo squat, and you're told to take 12 weeks off whilst you rehab whatever it might be, and then you go walk back into the gym, you're not going to want to get back under 100 kilos for working sets. You're not going to want to do that. So you're going to be rushing so quickly to try and get that back up to your normal working weights, which might be, I don't know, what's 80%, 240 plus, and you're going to be doing something, most of your working sets are kind of 240 plus. Well, you're going to injure yourself doing that. So we can't let you get to that point. So we need to keep you doing whatever the maximum is you can do through that 12-week process for rehabbing the original injury. And actually, that's a lot of my practice, and I think it's one of the massive missing aspects of people who like to treat things. It's like, okay, and what are you doing with the rest of their training? If you don't understand their training, you can't advise them on anyway. And if you're not from that world, whatever their sport is, and you can't communicate with their actual sports coach if they have one, or if they're self-coached, spend the time explaining to them the overall workload concepts, you're not going to be able to keep them conditioned whilst you rehab the original injury. And I do see this a fair amount. People who come to you, they have taken time off, and it's really difficult to get them back up to speed because you've got to be patient. And if they're not prepared to be patient, you see them again for something else because they do cause another problem. So it's more holistic, isn't it? Than
yeah, but I think there's some real big nuggets there. I think from us from a therapy practice, in the sense of, look, I think it is coming down to understanding the athlete, understanding the sport and all those kind of things, and managing expectation and all that kind of stuff. But I also think it's important from, if you are an athlete watching it, from an athlete perspective, that, you know, if you go to somebody or go and visit somebody who will take the time to listen and understand your outcome and what you want to do, that most of the time, what we'll probably do is, while we will have to unload some to allow stuff to heal and do well, and we will have to probably add some additional uncool exercises, is probably one way to say it most of the time in it. And in my world, you know, from my world of working in the MMA, they're not always impressed when we have to go and get the little pink dumbbells out to do some uncool stuff while they want to be whacking the heavy bag.
You say that though, like, because I work in like one of the most meated environments you possibly could. What I do find is the same guys who are happy to rip the piss out of what you're doing or what somebody else is doing when they're not injured are actually big softies. And as soon as there's any risk, they will lose their ability to do what they identify as, because it is their entire identity.
Yeah.
They will do anything, and it doesn't matter what you say. And it's, in some ways, the greatest people you could work with, they're fantastic, because in some ways, they're the most open-minded people on the planet. Because if you think like bodybuilders, brilliant, because if you think some of the things they're prepared to risk before there's any actual evidence for it, or research back at it, if it makes them look more muscular, it's that same mentality when it comes to rehab. It's like, I don't care what I have to do, as long as I can keep lifting. So they really will do anything, and they don't care if somebody rips the piss, because they must stay lifting, because it's everything in their life.
I guess that was one of the questions I was going to ask is, you know, for most people, you know, either from a rehabilitation background or general population, you know, how do you keep these guys, you know, because motivated and on focus and stuff? And I know you kind of touched on it there, you know.
It's easy. It's actually the easiest possible way, because their bias is exercise already, like you say. You said it in the last section, it's like, right, we're going to do this with exercises. Oh, brilliant. So, you know, some people, and don't get me wrong, I definitely get this. Some people turn up and, you know, somebody said, go and see this guy. They've always said, and despite the fact they always correct him, they always say, go and see this physio. And I'm like, that's actually not fair. I'm illegal. Not a physio, I'm a rehabilitator. But they come and see me, and occasionally they are just expecting me to rub them or electrocute them or something. And you can tell that they're disappointed. And no matter how much I'll try and sort of win them over and educate them, and maybe even do a little bit of manual stuff just to try and get that buy-in. Sometimes, that's it. I can't meet them at a level they're going to be happy with, because they wanted a rub down, and it was a miscommunication to start with. But generally, the strength guys and the bodybuilders and the gym rats love it, because it's something that, if you're saying to them, you can be proactive with this, think about it as training. Don't think about it as rehab. Think about it as very regressed training. And you train it the same way you would something else. You've got to let it recover. You've got to let it adapt. You've got to let it get better. But yeah, they love that, because it's their mantra.
Just out of curiosity then, really, how many, say you get an injured strength athlete, you've obviously brought them in on this basis of going, look, you know, we're going to keep training, but we're going to make some modifications, and we might do some uncool stuff, we'll call it, right? Well, they bought into it. How many of them continue that as an injury prevention bias afterwards, post-injury?
That's a tricky one, because one of the things that it's probably a development area for me all round, because it doesn't necessarily sit with my mentality. Is trying to book people for a right. We do need to review this at the end of the process, and we need to give you something ongoing then, because your ongoing won't necessarily be the same as the. It's basically dosage, isn't it? The dosage that's going to be required in the short term to get you to move forward isn't going to be what you need to continue with. I must admit, I'm pretty poor with that, because normally once people are making progress, I'm happy to say, great, off we go. Generally, they'll have the information to start with of how they might modify that moving forward. But it's a balance, isn't it? Because how many people are happy to invest in, I haven't got acute symptoms anymore, so I'll invest just on an ongoing basis. There's a few, but I think we're still, as a society, a little bit away from that kind of understanding and placing value on it.
I think I generally do, and I do generally believe that habits are changing, and people are starting to listen to people like yourself, in the sense of let's be honest. One of the things we all know is what injury stops us from doing is the stuff that we enjoy and love. I think you've had an injury, haven't you? Have you just had surgery recently?
Oh, I had this actually links to stuff we talked about before. I gave myself an inguinal hernia doing something that is absolutely ridiculous, that nobody other than me will care about. So at that time, there's a kettlebell lifting is a very fringe sport in its own right. And there are tables created by our Russian friends who've been doing this for a while, that have like targets on them that you can get a nominal rank for. And nobody in the UK, and as I understand it, nobody worldwide, have managed to do what is 5 minutes of snatching a 40-kilo kettlebell with a single hand switch. At my body weight, you have to do 55 reps. So you've got 5 minutes, but once you've picked it up, you can't put it down. You only get to switch hands once. So you've basically got to get, 28 in each hand to get continuously 28 in each hand to get your rank. So it's just taking me 5 minutes to explain that. So who cares about that other than me? So it's a pure ego thing.
I'm bought in now.
Yeah, it's a pure ridiculous ego thing. So I was doing that, and managed to pop my insides out doing that, which was great. And again, trying to get people to understand that there's a massive amount of benefit in terms of preventing injury in being able to. It's basically throwing a catch, isn't it? It's explosive. You throw the kettlebell overhead, and then when you drop it down, you catch it and repeat the process. So the eccentric loading of you dropping it from overhead and having to absorb that energy has a massive amount of injury prevention benefit. Full body eccentric loading like that.
Yeah.
But in order for it to have a benefit, it also has to have a risk. Otherwise, you're not getting the overload, are you, that we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
So really, how do you moderate that risk? And to my mind, the only thing you can really do with that is either check your mechanics or overall workload management. Well, I've been snatching about the same volume, roughly the same volume, on the 40 for like 6 months when it happened. And I was quite upset about that, because an inguinal hernia is not really a mechanical issue in that regard, is it's a pressure issue. So because it's a pressure issue, the only thing you could do is to my mind anyway, have built up to it slowly, which I'd done. And I was like, the textbook says this shouldn't have happened, and it has. So I was gutted. But it does demonstrate that thing, doesn't it? If you were going to be using that exercise for an injury reduction perspective, at a body weight of like high 80s, early 90s, you wouldn't be using that load. You certainly wouldn't be trying to do it continuously whilst fatigued like that. You might build up to that kind of load and do, 3 to 5 reps and rest and sets at that, but you wouldn't be getting yourself fatigued so that everything's falling apart technically. I did it on like rep 52 or something stupid.
Well, I think it shows, but I think, I guess one of the reasons why, but you do get that buy-in, and I think you've got that reputation in that world, is one, you understand what they go through, and you've proven that, because, you've got that, obviously you've proven your competitive nature, because you said, right, I'll smash that, which, we know there's people out there that will try and do it. But also what you've now got is that, and a great little training tip, always keep your ego in check when you're trying to do something, because else you'll end up under the surgeon's table.
It's been an incredibly valuable experience in many ways because, firstly, it was massively emotional because you actually had to deal with that. This shouldn't have happened. This shouldn't have happened because I followed sensible. This shouldn't have happened. But it has. So you need to grow up it and accept that you're doing something that's intrinsically stupid and it bit you on the ass, and that is fine. That's your fault. And then I had to avoid what I deal with on a daily basis of having that downward spiral of going, well, I can't do what I want to do now, so I'm literally going to sit on my ass. And I had to think of my own ways to modify training, which I spend all day doing for other people. And going, how can I modify it? What physical attributes can I maintain whilst I can't do what I want it to do? How do I go about doing that? What does that look like? I did that for 6 months waiting on the surgery. And then we had the whole surgery, and how do you rehab from the surgery? So it was absolutely invaluable experience in terms of going through the process that you spend all day talking to people about. And it made me feel a little bit more sort of valid and less of a fraud because.
Well, listen, if it's any consolation, I think it's well documented that most people know that I ruptured my Achilles, and it was one of those things where trying to do a Superman punch of all things in a boxing ring. I know. We won't go on to that, but what?
Afterwards, you must have thought, well, I was doing that. Why wasn't it?
Everyone just burst out laughing, and then I was just in the heel on the floor. Everyone thought what the best part about it was, one, in the back of my mind, I thought, someone just kicked me. But everyone else was laughing, going, one, that's one of the most ineffective punches for an amateur boxer in the world. Two, you're not skilled enough to throw it anyway. And what it did do, and this is what I'm kind of talking about, is, I definitely think as a practitioner, I became a lot more empathetic because I'd gone through that whole journey, like you've said, and I think it made me a better practitioner. It definitely made me understand, like you've said there, I think very well, and I totally agree. And so that whole emotional thing of going, why did this happen? I conditioned my body well enough not to be able to do this, and sometimes stuff does happen, and I think we've got to go through that, and how we recover from that is good. Look, it's been, I've absolutely loved this, and I'm no doubt if hopefully we can get you back on again. The last thing I want to kind of just touch on is, if we have got, we're doing this interview in the middle of our lockdown, so if you're watching afterwards, sorry, but this is where we're doing our interview because we've got time and it's been great to do it, and I've loved it. What tips would you say? So, there's, there will be people out there who are strongman athletes. There will be people out there that are powerlifting athletes. There might be people who are generally into the bodybuilding, strength training, or CrossFit. What would be your, I know you can't give the injury prevention for everything, but what would your take-home messages to most people be to try and stay away from the likes of us, really?
For the gym stuff, I actually think there is a fairly straightforward one, and it's not going through the rapid program changes, because one of the things that the gym guys absolutely love is searching for what might be the magic answer to whatever the problems are training-wise, which is great. Keep doing that, keep that enthusiasm, keep trying to make everything better, but you come across things like guys who struggle with the squat, strength athletes struggle with the squat. Right, I found this program, I found this amazing Russian program where I've got to squat 3 times a week. Right, how many times a week were you squatting? Once. So you've tripled your workload? Yeah. Right, okay. And that rapid program change, it's only got one end, doesn't it? You're going to get hurt. And it's really popular in gym circles of focusing on something by adding an entire new day of it, or just massive rapid changes in your programming. And actually coming away from that, I think that the whole industry benefits hugely from focusing more on consistency and patience and less on a rapid changes. And that'd be the biggest thing it could do to avoid seeing us.
Cool. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time today. It's been absolutely excellent. I've got no doubt when we post this out, we're going to get a rock of questions. So I'll have to get you back on again because I'm sure everybody's going to be posting. So listen, this is Chris from the Move Well Project. Chris, do you want to just tell anybody who wants to learn more about yourself, what kind of platforms you hang out on, or how anyone can get in contact with you?
So pretty much Facebook and Instagram. So Facebook's the Move Well Project, and then my name and stuff. And Instagram is also the Move Well Project. So all one word, the Move Well Project.
Fantastic. Well, we'll post it below anyways, the Chris's details, so you can get hold of him. I definitely advise. I think you put some fantastic content out there for people. So if you are looking or you are involved in strength or that kind of stuff, and you're interested in that kind of stuff, then definitely follow Chris and check him out. So I appreciate your time today, pal. Stay safe and well. See you soon.